Well, welcome officially this evening, friends. I want to invite you all to enjoy what we're about to present tonight. But before we get to our presentation, I just want to acknowledge that VocalEye is broadcasting to us all this evening from the unceded, ancestral, and occupied territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We all get the privilege this evening of joining through the magic of Zoom that connects us from all over Turtle Island or Canada, or all over parts of the United States and other parts further in the world. And so it's a privilege to be able to connect in this way. I also want to just, as I always do as of late, acknowledge what's the truth that's been uncovered lately. And that includes the 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops, the 751 in Saskatchewan, the 189 in Cranbrook, the 160 on Vancouver Island. These are people, human beings, children who were buried at the side of former residential schools. And we are uncovering a lot of that these days. And I know in my own backyard here in North Vancouver, literally a stone's throw from where I live, there's a former residential school that is under is being looked at archaeologically right now to try and find 12 documented human beings that may be on that property. So there is more to come. So right now, I want to acknowledge those 1,315 unmarked graves. And again, I like to share with folks for context that there are more than 130 former residential schools across Canada or Turtle Island. So there will be more to come, unfortunately. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy Amantea. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator here for VocalEye Descriptive Art Society. And oh goodness, it's a Wednesday. Yep, August the 11th is where we're at. And tonight we're going to share with you our almost live virtual VocalEye performance number 55. Shout out to Louise, 2 nickels, number 55. Before I introduce our special guest, I just want to thank all of those of you in this space who have made a financial contribution to VocalEye. We are not charging for any of this programming, but certainly welcome any donations that may come from our community to help continue this type of programming. We always put a link in the chat, so there is one there this evening as well. If you feel like you have the capacity, please, no obligation, friends, just an offering if it's within your capacity to do so. And a reminder that this is going to be our last presentation before our hiatus. Well, after tonight, we will be on hiatus until September the 22nd, when we return with the Cinevolution presentation of their highlights from Digital Carnival C, which is it's a bit of a, I'll say an online media festival, to sum it up, and really, really interesting stuff. I'm really excited to help curate that event and bring it to y'all. Okay, friends, it's time to let you all in on what we're doing this evening. And I know that many of you are following our hotline or our email list and know that tonight we're presenting to you A Future for Memory. This is art and life after the Great East Japan earthquake. So there's going to be lots to talk about. We're going to hold the Q&A to the very end because we want to give space for the artwork and the storytelling that goes with this artwork. So I want to just invite 2 folks into our space. Our own Steph Kirkland, founder and executive director of VocalEye Descriptive Art Society, who is going to be our describer this evening. And Dr. Fuyubi Nakamura, who's a social anthropologist with the Museum of Anthropology, who is part of curating this event. So really excited to have you both in this space. Hello, friends.
Hi, good evening, Amy.
Good evening.
Hi, Amy. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited to have you both here. Steph, you're always here, but you're usually hiding in the background, running all of our technical stuff. And so I just want to invite this conversation to start maybe with Fuyubi. We'll start with you in terms of introducing yourself to the group, because you are, I don't know what a social anthropologist is, so let's just be honest. Maybe you can tell me what a social anthropologist is and what your role is at the Museum of Anthropology.
Okay, Amy, and good evening, everybody again. So as was just introduced, my name is Fuyubi Nakamura. I'm a socio-cultural anthropologist, which I'm going to explain a little bit later. And I work as the curator for Asia at the Museum of Anthropology, or MOA. and also as assistant professor in the Department of Asian Studies at UBC. Would also like to acknowledge that UBC's Point Grey campus, including the museum, is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of Hankominam-speaking masculine people who are our kind hosts. And I am Japanese, originally from Tokyo, and I am a person of color with dark hair and dark eyes. I grew up in few different cities in Japan, and I have lived in New Zealand, United Kingdom, Australia, Brazil, and Argentina before moving to Canada to take up my position at UBC in 2014. So I've been here a bit over, well, around 7 years now. My family still lives in Tokyo. What social anthropology is, social cultural anthropology is basically, it's a kind of study about human beings. Anything goes. Whatever we do can be the subject for what anthropologists might study. So we can do anything really we want, but that's what we do anyway. So I'm very pleased that we have opportunity to work with you, with VocalEye again, to offer a virtual tour of our exhibition. We worked together last November to offer a tour of the Shame and Prejudice exhibition by Kent Monkman. And then, as you said earlier, we are offering the virtual tour of the Future for Memory, Art and Life After the Great East Japan Earthquake today. So Steph and I have spent quite a bit of time working together to prepare a tour of this exhibition, which I curated. I won't say much about the disaster or the exhibition, as Steph will talk about them. I'm very happy I can share with you what I have been doing for the past 10 years since the disaster through this exhibition. So I hope you all enjoy the tour this evening. Thank you.
Thanks for that lovely introduction. It was so well prepared. I'm curious, and I know that we're going to get deeper into this, but maybe you can, Fuyubi, maybe you can just share with us a small amount of background in terms of, I think many of us may know of this disaster as the Fukushima disaster. So maybe just share with us a little bit about what it is we're talking about tonight. Like, what is the Great East Japan Earthquake? Okay, so on March 11th in 2011, so 10 years ago, Japan, East Japan, well, Greater East Japan was hit by massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake on that day. This massive earthquake is one of the largest in recorded history that caused tremendous tsunami, which affected the coastal region in the northeastern region known as Tohoku in Japan. And that tsunami then damaged the nuclear reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. But you just mentioned, actually, this disaster is not known as Fukushima. If we're talking about nuclear disaster, yes, it's Fukushima. But this thing, we kind of call it triple disaster, earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster. And collectively, we call it Great East Japan Earthquake, or 3/11, because the disaster happened on March 11. Bit like a 9/11, as happened in New York. So we often call it 3/11 or 3.11 in Japanese, basically 3.11. Anyway, that's the name of this triple disaster we are talking about today. And my involvement actually started a few months after this disaster. When the disaster actually happened in March, actually I was working in Argentina. As I said earlier, I have lived in Argentina. So I was actually working at the museum, National Museum in Buenos Aires in Argentina, curating a completely different kind of exhibition. But then I heard the news that Japan had been knocked by this massive earthquake and tsunami. So after finishing the exhibition in Argentina, I decided to take a leave from my work and ask myself what I could do. So originally, I just went up to the disaster region in this particular prefecture. We call prefecture rather than province, but called Miyagi Prefecture in Tohoku region. And then just was as a volunteer involved in relief and recovery activities. I did anything that was needed on the ground
cooking for, survivors, delivering aids. I did anything that was needed on that day. And then I spent about 3 months there that year. But after that, I felt, I cannot just continue being a volunteer all the time. So I decided that, decided to turn that into my research project so that I had a kind of reason to return to that vision. So since that time, I have kept going back to Tohoku every year. Unfortunately, but last year because of pandemic. I'm hoping to go back this year if situation keeps improving. But anyway, so that's my original involvement with disaster. So the past 10 years, I have kept doing research, meeting people in the disaster region. But that's the origin of how this exhibition started.
Thanks for the origin story. Appreciate that. Steph, what are we going to experience here tonight? Because you're going to be our eyes and our describer through this event. So what are we looking forward to this evening?
Well, I have had the incredible privilege and honor of being guided through the exhibit by Fuyubi, and so I will do my best to give highlights of this amazing exhibit. It was a very exhibition. It's been very difficult for me to narrow it down to a manageable size but I'm hoping I will be able to convey some of the amazing projects and artists that Fuyubi has compiled and brought to us at the Museum of Anthropology. The context of the work, as Fuyubi has indicated, was this triple disaster, 3/11, and the death toll was somewhere in the realm of 15,900. So this is still being evaluated 10 years later. There are over 2,500 people that are still missing. And there are many different causes of death, of course. And so we just would like to send all of our heartfelt condolences to all of those people who've been affected by this disaster. And disaster, one of the themes in this exhibition is that disaster is not confined to just one country or one region or one city, but it has this global relevance and reverberation in literally and figuratively across space and time. So this exhibit, marking as we have heard, the 10th anniversary of 3/11 and the many themes that are evoked in this exhibition, how we deal with memory when our physical surroundings are drastically altered, the changing in physical and psychological landscapes in the aftermath, the global impact and relevance of this disaster, human life in relation to nature, and of course the creative and expressive impulses in humans and in nature, the resilience. And the haunting question that Fuyubi asks is, what would we look for if our hometown were suddenly swept away? How do we trace what physical traces do we look for? I mean, first of course, we look for our loved ones. And then what are the material objects that we look for to help us connect to our memories and to connect to our past and to give us some proof that we really were there and it wasn't just some kind of, that the disaster wasn't a dream and that our lives before haven't been a dream. So
that's a lot.
It's a lot.
I'm really interested in this content and what we're about to witness here together tonight, because I also believe personally that that being a witness and holding these stories and these memories is kind of the duty of human beings as we take these stories forward in our own lives and let them imprint on our souls and carry them with us to honor other people that have been through these things. And maybe at some point in our lives to draw strength from that if we end up going through something ourselves that we weren't expecting on some kind of level. So I'm really, really happy that this exhibition is coming to our space. With that, it's 7:00 p.m. Pacific time. So I'd love to put it in your hands, Steph, to start the presentation, and we'll do a Q&A, folks, at the end. So hang in there with us as Steph takes us through And Fuyubi's gonna jump in when necessary to clarify or expand on some concepts and ideas. So Steph, I leave it with you.
Thanks so much, Amy. And yes, Fuyubi, please. I apologize in advance if my pronunciations are lacking. And please, if I get anything, if I miss something or get anything wrong, please jump in and correct me. So Rick, if you'd like to start us off, and I'll officially welcome you to this virtual tour of A Future for Memory. I just need to get my screen back here. Thank you very much. There we go. So Future for Memory, Art and Life After the Great East Japan Earthquake. This is a collaboration with the Museum of Anthropology at UBC. And we can go to the next slide. This is the beginning of, so in this overview, there are essentially 6 installations in the exhibition that we'll be covering tonight. And this first one is from a selection of photos from the Rias Art Museum of Art's documentary of the Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami. So what they have created is a permanent exhibition of the disaster at their museum. It's located in Kesennuma
City.
Kesennuma City. Thank you.
In Miyagi Prefecture.
In Miyagi, thank you. And the thing about this this art museum is that it's located on a hill, so it's away, at some distance from potential tsunami damage. The curator of this art museum arrived there in 2006, and there's the history of tsunami and earthquake in the region. And one of the first exhibits that he presented was about this history of tsunami. And this artwork that is now on the screen, it was part of that exhibition. In 1896, there was a tremendous earthquake, second only to the 3/11 event. Earthquake and tsunami. And this is an illustration of a family being swept away by this Sanriku tsunami in 1896. It shows it shows this family swept away by large swells of blue-gray water that swirl past a gnarled tree, and clutching the base of the tree are 2 young men. They're clinging to the tree, and one of them is holding a young infant. In the limbs of the tree above them is the limp body of a woman. She's been caught in these branches, as if the branches reached out and grabbed her by the waist, like an arm grabbing her by the waist as she's swept by the wave. And she's doubled over her and hanging very limply. Her pale limbs and her black hair seem to sway with the force of the wind, of the breeze of that's created by the force of the waves underneath her, the water underneath her. And then the rest of the family in the water, an older man reaching out to her, frantically fighting against the flow of the waves, and other young women around him clutching onto him. One woman floating in a barrel, clutching onto the back of his kimono, and another who's been turned upside down in the waves, knocked off her feet, clutching his leg. This is, an artist's interpretation of what actually happened, the tsunami in progress on this day of celebration, a Boys' Day festival, and also floating amidst the turbulent waters is a Japanese armor helmet, which was used in these celebrations. The sense of vulnerability of these people, their kimono undone, and it's the coldness of the water, and just the sense and the force, the incredible force of the water is conveyed in this illustration. One of the impulses for this curator, again, he was inspired by again, the history of this area, and also by an announcement that was made in 2000 by the government that was a prediction of a future earthquake with a magnitude over 8, there was a 99% chance of this kind of enormous earthquake occurring within 30 years. So he had that, he'd heard that, and Japan is no stranger to earthquakes. He experienced any number of them in his lifetime. And then coming to this area where they've experienced such a magnitude of 9 was in this 1896 earthquake as well. So the impulse behind the exhibit was educational and, let's prepare. This is most likely going to happen again. It didn't just happen in 1896. There was 1933 also. There was an earthquake, and then there's a relationship with Chile. So the earthquakes that happen in Chile also send tsunami to Japan. So this about every 40 years, there's, approximately there's some kind of disaster along the coast. So this was part of his motivation. And although the earthquakes, we can prepare for those, the tsunami, the destruction can be just really devastating. So this permanent exhibition, if we can move now to the next slide. So what the curator experienced 3/11 in person, and he tells the story of the day. It's harrowing. It's as if he can convey this to Fuyubi in one of her video interviews with him, and it's as if it happened yesterday. The earthquake was so intense. He recognized it as it started to happen. He was actually in the museum, which again is on this hill. And everyone in Japan has been trained to know that when there's an earthquake, a tsunami follows. And he mentions, recognizing he was in this earthquake, but halfway through, he's thinking, this has to be something more than an earthquake. This is no normal earth. This is bigger than an earthquake. So he was expecting, he didn't expect to live, and that he expected the tsunami that resulted to be incredible. Anyway, so he was absolutely right in his prediction. And so what happened afterwards, having survived, the questions then arose for him. I have an art museum, what do I do with it? So he and his staff got together and documented the devastation afterwards. They started almost immediately, and for 2 years, they took photographs and collected artifacts and so on, and then created what has become a permanent exhibition that opened, I think, in 2013. So this is a permanent document of what happened in the region. This photo that's up now is of a neighborhood actually near where Fuyubi was volunteering. And in the foreground, we're looking downhill, and there's a path that goes through a red Shinto gate. And on the left, there's a 3-story white building that's half collapsed. And in the background, there's this neighborhood that's just been pretty much flattened, and there's a road that runs through it and a few buildings still standing in the distance and the surrounding hills. So it's as if the tsunami came in, as if from the top of the photograph, and just scoured all of the buildings, scrubbed and carried them, and their remains are piled and stacked at the foot of this red Shinto gate. The Shinto gate, for those of you who don't know what those are, it's like an empty door frame. There's 2 posts placed widely apart, and they're like telephone poles. Similarly, they're quite high as well. And then they're connected by a horizontal beam, and that extends past the verticals. And then there's a second horizontal beam that has curved ends, so it's curved upward at both ends, and the top is painted black. Most of the gates are red like this, and maybe black on the top. So this is part of this project. One of the things so in the exhibition at the museum, Fuyubi has collected 32 of the photographs that were taken, and so I've just selected a couple. So this is one. The next slide, Rick, is also in the city, and this is a classroom, and a car is in the classroom upside down, half buried by pillars and rubble and beams. And one of the things that is so compelling about this exhibition is that as the teams were collecting this material, they would also include their impressions and their comments about what they were documenting. And the curator had one of his impressions was that he just couldn't believe the devastation and how things, it was surreal. Nothing was the way it was. Things were literally upside down. And it was, to him, he had this, what he called a childlike notion that a giant had been playing and tossing things around. And in this photograph, it certainly conveys that impression. It's as if a giant toddler had hurled this car through and into this classroom, and it's upside down and mangled. And the thing about this photo also is that this classroom is on the 3rd floor of the high school. So that is how high the tsunami reached and how strong it was to be able to move these multi-ton cars and fishing vessels and just into places where they never belonged. And in more personally, the next slide, Rick, is of an interior. And this is, I believe this was a photo taken in a person's dwelling. It's a personal effect, and it's a jumble. They're really not recognizable to any of us. And it's only when the caption and the commentary points out some of the things in the photograph that we begin to recognize them. So these are all personal belongings that look like they've been through, they've been through a tsunami. So they're filthy dirty because of the water, the water, and they're just mashed together. So, but at the center of this photo is a small teddy bear that's face down, and we can make out the head and the little ears, and then once we have that kind of context, there's a basket, there's a hanger, there are clothes and bedding and just all of these things, almost the same color of this dirt-soaked water that has gone through and mashed them. So this sense of there's a quote that I've taken actually from the exhibition on their website. The word rubble means broken pieces of slate, brick. It can also mean something worthless. But for the victims of the East Japan earthquake and tsunami, there is nothing we may call rubble. They are the remains of one's precious house, which are devastated and taken away from us, and assets that were dear to us. They carry precious memories of our lives. And this is also a very important theme that runs through this exhibition, that what looks to us like rubble, debris, is, these were the lives, belongings, possessions of people just a moment before this happened. And what can we salvage? What would you, again, if faced with this and coming, what are some of the things that you would be looking for and hoping to recover and hang on to? I'm sorry, did someone have a comment or question?
No, you're okay, Steph, keep going.
Okay. So that is the Rias Arc Museum project. The next slide is from an Ikebana. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing
Yes,
it properly.
Ikebana is correct.
Ikebana master. So Ikebana is the traditional Japanese art of flower arranging. And those words just make it simplify it to such a degree. It is such an art. And Atsunobu Katagiri is a master at this art. And he was called in to an area close to the Fukushima evacuated zone. Minamisoma, I believe, is the area along the coast, because in the summer of 2013, there was a miraculous kind of event there. A flower that was thought to be extinct, it was certainly endangered, that had once bloomed all along that coast and hadn't been seen in 100 years, suddenly bloomed all along the coast in 2013, so 2 years after the disaster. And so he was invited to work with this with a different museum there, located there, in close to the evacuated area, and invited also to use some of the artifacts from the museum. So this flower is called a Mizawi, and it's an endangered, as I mentioned, grows along the coast in a lagoon, marsh-like water. So these plants were, they disappeared because of human activity. These wetlands were repossessed by humans and turned into standard agricultural paddies. And so that was it. They were gone for 100 years. So this was an amazing event. Katagiri worked with the museum. They invited him to use the flowers and even objects from their collection as containers for these flowers. And the image that we're looking at now is the result of that collaboration. So that the vase used here is ancient Jomon pottery. This is from the mid-period, so it's about circa 2500 to 1500 BCE. So it's amazing that it has survived, and it's holding several branches of the Mizawi flower, which is there's a lot of heart-shaped green leaves, sturdy stems, and the flower itself is a very delicate purple flower. And in addition to doing this work, Katagiri wasn't interested in just having a commission. He actually moved to the town where the museum is located, and I'm not sure if he actually stayed with the curator there, or but they certainly were working together on it as another project evolved from this. So from what I understand, Katagiri would travel around the neighborhood and the area, visiting various sites of the disaster. And if we just go to the next slide, Rick, this is one of the first installations that he created on his travels. So this is also a schoolroom where he used objects that he found as vases or containers for flowers that he collected in the area. So in this photograph, there is the vase that he's using is a child's rubber boot, and the flowers that he's collected and put in are wildflowers. And he names all of his, and then he took this photograph. So the boot sits on the ledge of a large like picture window that has no glass left in it, and it looks onto a view of a field, bright green field, a gray blue sky, and there are leafless sort of skeletal trees in the distance. And it actually looks like it's a landscape painting, and the boot and flowers look like they're part of this painting. And the interior, the surrounding walls are chipped and cracked concrete, and then below the level of the windowsill, the window ledge, there is a pile of unrecognizable material, just bits of wood and whatever was swept into the room and destroyed there. So he continued this, and I'm not sure how many photographs are in the exhibit, but I think there must be 2 or 3 dozen of these photos. This series, this was the first in a series that he came to call Sacrifice. And I think he's published a book as well with these photos. And again, suggesting that the flower is a sacrifice. The flower sacrifices itself to be displayed in his work, and that it's an offering. There's so many connotations for that word, and he actually uses the English word sacrifice for this particular exhibition. Next, we can just go to the next slide also, Rick. So one of the other contexts that he visited was a movie theater. So These theater seats are what used, but they were probably maroon, but they're covered, again, they're covered in grime and dirt, and it's a very dimly lit theater. There's just some natural light that seems to be coming in. We can't see from where it's coming. And the seats are covered, the headrests are covered with a kind of a delicate lace protector, and they're kind of, they're kind of dingy and askew. And some of the seats don't have them, they're missing. And Katagiri has placed on some, not all of these headrests, a bright ball of hydrangea blossoms. So they're a big spherical ball of blossoms, and these hydrangea blossoms are a purpley blue color, and they rest on the tops of the seats as like heads would, or like fancy hats would. And someone else was mentioning that the shape of these theater seats reminded them, especially with the lace covers that are lighter in color than the dark seat, that these rows of them reminded them in their shape of gravestones. And so there's a bit evocative also of that in this photograph. The number of photos that he took, he stayed in the region for 8 months, and doing this work and meeting people and visiting these places and getting to know residents, getting to know the flowers, and making these installations and photographing them. So this also resulted in an exhibition, and the curator was somewhat concerned about how the residents would respond to this work. But one of them, actually, they were actually surprised that the response was quite positive, and one of them expressing their gratitude, saying that what is often called debris are actually our treasured objects. Thank you for treating them not as garbage, but as flower vases. So again, this theme coming forward. My notes are duplicating myself right in front of my eyes here. Okay. So the next project, this one of the things I wanted to mention also was that the artist's time in Minnesota revealed to him why he feels a dull twinge whenever he cuts flowers to arrange them. And I get the impression that this is something he had been experiencing, as he takes the life of a flower to create his art. And it was doing this work that connected him to why he feels that, and I think transformed his way of working in some way. Essentially, the flowers being witnesses, silent witnesses to the suffering around them, also offered as comfort, also offered to honor the dead. So the next project is the Lost Home Scale Remodel Project. Maybe I'll pause here just for a moment. Take a breath. And feels
Would
like
you like to have a sip of water?
It feels like when we talk in terms of, I don't want to be duplicating the tsunami in terms of all of the information that I'm giving you here.
This particular photo for me is quite impactful. They're all impactful. I mean, let's be honest, but the way we put into context the idea of I don't know, people that were in these seats that aren't in these seats anymore, or their symbolism to, maybe like a rudimentary headstone kind of idea, really has an impact of the loss of human beings from this disaster.
And this is the power also of art and artists, to express the unexpressible. And another theme that runs through all of these projects and these works is the response of the survivors, and what it means to survive and to heal and to repair and to continue. And how do you do that? How do you express and share your grief? And art is one way to do it. The artist providing that language, for it, so that these things that are too big for us to put into words. So Rick, the next slide. So the next project is the Lost Homes scale model restoration project. And this was started by an architect at Kobe University. And the devastation along the coast was so, I mean, really, the communities were just erased completely. And so he got this idea to recreate the pre-disaster model of a town that had disappeared at 1 to 500 scale. So 1 square meter of the model would equal 500 square meters of the town. And this slide that we're looking at now is of one of those models, and it is a 3D rendering of the town. So like a satellite, would be like a satellite view. So it would be tactile, and it's now completely blank and white. And that's a standard for most architectural models, I believe, when they, in the first phase, that they are often white. And so the model, this would be the first phase of the project, is creating these models. And then the next phase would have the architectural students and the students that are involved in the project take the model to the town and have a memory, what they called a memory workshop with the community survivors. And the next slide is one of the workshops in process. So two women from the community, they're older women. One is dressed in more contemporary clothing, and the other is in more traditional Japanese, wearing a kimono and obi, and they are hovering over the model with one of the volunteers who's holding a clipboard. And the woman who's dressed in contemporary clothes is pointing to something in the model, and they're all just keenly looking to where she's pointing and smiling together. And so these workshops were designed to bring memories back to life. So these models were painted by the workshop participants, by the residents, by the survivors, and color was brought back to them, memory was brought back to them together. And Rick, if you want to just play this next video. This was a video that I took with my cell phone, so it's a little rocky, but it gives you the idea of the finished model is full of color. The water, this was a coastal town, so the water is pale blue, a kind of shiny material, and there are boats on the water, and the houses are painted different colors, and there's greenery and a lot of detail. And as I walk the length of this model, which sits like an island in the middle of the exhibition room, so you can walk all the way around it, and it's probably about, I think, 12 feet long and at least 6 feet wide, perhaps. It's quite large. And at the end of the table, at one end of the table, the museum has added a plexiglass gauge. And Rick, if you can just keep playing it. Yes, there we go. So the gauge indicates the tsunami run-up height. So at the base of the gauge is sea level. So what I did is knelt down at the edge of the table, and I can look at the sea level, and then the height of the tsunami is indicated by this plexiglass gauge. So we can see through the plexiglass to the town, and the height of the tsunami was 29 meters, which pretty much, yeah, is it's over 100 feet. It's essentially like a 10-story building, so enormous. And in the next video, more professionally done by our colleagues at MOA, this is a rerun of we can go back over mine. The next one starts from the tsunami gauge and then gives an overview again of the model, looking very much like a town full of life, and then goes in for more close-ups of the details. So these have been painted by the survivors, the terraced greenery. And then there's something else that is more apparent in these close-ups. There are these little plexiglass flags. They're called memory flags. So little bits, little strips of plexiglass, again, semi-transparent, that are written, that have Japanese writing on them. And the writing is, there would be names of people who lived in these dwellings, or memories of what occurred in these locations. And so all of these things were created, again, through these workshops, and having the participants supply these flags and to paint the town again. And the response from the volunteers who were working with them was just also, they were as affected by this project as the residents were. And one of the, just as a side note, white is traditionally a color of mourning in Japan. And so there's also that symbology there as well, into bringing color and life back to this white memorial, essentially, and bringing it back. That memories are created by community, and this is an incredibly powerful project.
So Steph, when you're in this space at the Museum of Anthropology, you know, going around this, you know, table that's kind of like an island, so you can go all the way around this this model, right? And you can get different vantage points of it. How did that feel? Was there like a recognition in you as a human being when you were in that space of the enormity of what had been wiped out? Like what was that like? Because it's really hard to interpret a scale model that's 1 to 500, and you know, like what that really is. But I'm wondering if there's a feeling that was invoked for you.
Well, I felt like a giant. You know, it's like, you know, I was the giant, and then there's this miniature world. This was, you know, really this realistic world in front of me, and you know, and all the activity that happened there in the water. There are tiny boats that are moving, you know, in the water, and it wasn't until I got to the end of the table and looked through that tsunami gauge that it really hit me. And I just could not, you know, it is really beyond imagining.
Right, because that gauge, like if again we're looking at the scale model, that gauge would be higher than probably than most of the stuff on the model.
Oh, any of the buildings. So the buildings would be, you know, so if this gauge of 29 meters was about so let's say the size, almost the height of if it were the height of my hand, the gauge, then the height of the tallest building in the town would only come maybe halfway up my palm, not even.
Right.
You know, so the rest of that height,
the tsunami sort of overpowers everything.
Just absolutely towering over everything, because all of the buildings were it was residential, again, as a fishing village, coastal town. So a lot of the buildings were, you know, dwellings, the lower buildings, not big high rises, you know. So yeah.
And what's interesting to me as you describe the model before it gets, you know, the paint added and the memory flags added, it's kind of like, for me, I feel like the plain model is the devastation, like almost like Mother Earth wiped it clean, and then people came back and almost rebuilt it from like the memories have rebuilt this town, metaphorically speaking anyways. But the idea of this model going from the beginning at phase 1 of this project, or the different phases of this stark whiteness that has no definition and no details, to this model that looks like a village, like you've taken a photograph of a village.
And it also being an aid to memory, because I think, I mean, just even from my very limited experience, I haven't certainly not, I have not survived anything remotely like this. But just watching things around me being erased or knocked down, or for whatever reason, there's a, whether it's a fire or whether it's deliberate, you know, human development, or what's happening that blocks, you know, city blocks of my neighborhood completely gone one day, and then I'm finding that I can't remember what was there, and that is there's something about that that is very disturbing, you know. And so to have something, to have photographs, to have reminders of what used to be there, because I take so much for granted in my day-to-day of what I'm seeing and encountering. You know, I just kind of expect, you know, like I think like most people, we just expect it to be there forever, or, you know, as long as we want it to be there. And that's just not the case. And so the having the model as an anchor for people to, and that canvas, that blank canvas, to then be able to build, oh yes, and working together. So it's not just one person having to figure, you know, trying to remember the entire town, all of the residents coming together, and one person's memory sparking another person's memory, sparking another, adding, and then adding details like that collectively. How powerful that is, that just that activity, these workshops provided. Yeah. Much healing. So to date, they've this project, they've created models for 65 areas that have been affected, and organized 45 local workshops, and they're still creating workshops for people. One of the things that came out as well in talking to, when Fuyubi was talking to the project organizers, that people's memories change and their ability to talk about things. You know, I mean, it takes time. You know, within the first 2 years, I think they were mentioning that most of the memories that people had were just of the event. You know, just the trauma of the event, like getting through the event, like what happened and how they, you know, were coping with it. And that after about 2 years, there was more room to breathe. There was more, oh yes, looking at what happened before. And this model that is on exhibit at the Museum of Anthropology is a model of Ofunatu town in Iwate Prefecture, and I apologize for my pronunciations there. And this town will, you know, put a pin in this town because it also features later on in the exhibit with other connections that happen that that Fuyubi made in putting this exhibition together. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this particular project? You're good.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
So the island, you know, mentioning that this model sitting like an island in the middle of this exhibition hall, behind it is the second project that we're going to talk about, the Omoid, which means memory, Omoid Salvage project. And this particular project is called their Lost and Found project. Rick, do you want to play the video and I can sort of chat about it? So this is a wall of photographs that's behind the Lost Homes model. And it's filled with photographs that have been rescued. And Fuyubi will talk to us a little bit about her volunteer work with a similar organization that worked at rescuing and cleaning damaged photographs. This wall is, I mean, this installation is so powerful, again, because of its position behind the Lost Homes model. This wall, which is about 10 feet high and 30 feet wide, is angled such that the top of the wall tilts toward us, much like a wave. So it's like this wave of photographs. It's I think a brilliant design, and really, again, the impact of that it's just that tilting of the wall just makes this installation even more powerful, as that sense of this wave of photographs that were swept by the tsunami, that were gathered and collected. There are approximately 5,000, I think, photographs on this wall, and also part of the this installation, Rick. There's if you continue the video, there are some books as well. So these photographs are a special kind of photograph that I'll talk about. There's a book that's been published about people who've been reunited with their photographs, and because that is a part of the volunteer project. And then there's also on display an actual photo album that was rescued from the tsunami that's heavily damaged. And that's part of this particular installation. It's called Lost and Found. So what these volunteer groups were doing with the photographs, ones that had recognizable images, they would try to reunite them with their owners. So the Omioid Salvage had approximately 800,000 photographs that and they're still working on reuniting the photographs with their owners. But in the process of doing this, they also came across photographs like this that are so damaged that there's really almost no recognizable detail left to them. In the 6 photos that are on display here in this album, in this open page of the album, there's nothing. It's just abstract chemicals. The images like have dissolved and practically melted into the plastic covering. But there's, of the 6 photos, one of the photos, there is just a pair of legs. There is some detail in the center, a pair of legs dressed in dark trousers with red socks. And it's this kind of, these just tiny detail. It's like solving a mystery or hunting for clues. But handling all of these photographs, apparently, even the ones that were heavily damaged, they just felt that they couldn't throw them away. Again, this speaks to this theme that we've been talking about, that it's not debris. These are people's lives. These are memories. Why do any of us take photographs? We're trying to capture a memory for the future. We're trying to, record our loved ones and moments that are important to us. And that's what all of these photographs represented. And so to an outsider, yes, oh, well, what's the point? It feels, it's garbage, not to the workers here. So they decided that they would keep them and that they would turn this into an exhibit. So Rick, if you want to show the next photo. So this is just a photograph of the middle section of the wall as it appears at the museum. And I do believe Fuyubi is standing in front of the wall, so to give us a sense of the scale. And then the next photograph is, the next slide is a close-up of some of the photographs, some of these heavily damaged photographs, really with not many recognizable details in them. And what really struck me about this is that these dissolved images are as unique as the original images would have been. No two are alike. They may have similar, the colors may have resolved into kind of similar shades of orange, red, or black, or green, or gray, but their patterns are all completely different. And in some, there really are small traces of what the original image was. In the slides that's up right now, there's we've kind of zoomed in on about half a dozen of these photos, and there's just the half of the bare outline of a man wearing a suit. That's kind of all we can, his face, you cannot see his face, or the room that he's in. But the longer we look at these things, and the more we can see. And certainly the idea is that if this was your photo, if that was someone you knew, you might actually be able to recognize them, because we don't. need as many clues when things are familiar to us. We
You
can,
might
we
recognize
might
like
be able to
a silhouette or something, right?
just something. There's something
Yeah.
about it, or the composition, or just where that bit of that person, where those red, those pants and those red socks, and just how, and their position in the photograph, someone might recognize it. So that is the other thing about putting these images on exhibit, is that perhaps someone might find them, but mostly it's for people who weren't affected by this disaster to get some sense of the loss of what happened, and the tremendous efforts made by volunteers and survivors to reunite people with their lost possessions and objects. I think maybe this is a good opportunity to bring Fuyubi in, because this is the kind of work that, not particularly with this particular project, but photo recovery is something that she worked on.
Sure. As I say, as a volunteer, I did all sorts of things. But because I was there for quite a long time, I was involved in this particular town called Minami Sanrik town in Miyagi Prefecture, because there were many volunteer groups doing the same thing. Because what happened was many volunteers actually were clearing out the road full of debris or rubbles. But Steph also kept talking about what we call debris or rubbles are actually full of somebody's belongings. So as we cleared the road of houses, we kept finding all those family photo albums and photographs. So we decided to kind of rescue them. And then we started cleaning these photographs, because unless we cleaned, the photograph would be damaged further, because the photos are full of like bacteria or the dirt. So unless they're cleaned, the remaining images on the surface would disappear. That's why we started cleaning those rescued photos. The cleaning process is actually quite simple. It's time consuming, but we basically just wash those photos in the water only. We don't need any solution. We just wash them with water only. But we have to really wash very carefully. Otherwise, what's left on the surface might disappear. So we have to really clean very carefully. And after we clean them, we dry them completely so that they can be kept and we could look for the owners. So that's what I was doing for several months in the disaster region. So for me, this was actually idea for the exhibition came from this, thinking about the relationship between, memory and the photograph or the object. Because these days, we just take digital photographs these days. We don't take, photos using film negatives and then develop them. We don't do that much anymore, right? But because these are actual photo prints, not digital photograph, they actually survived actually the tsunami, because the digital photograph saved on the computer or the CD-ROM or memory stick, they didn't survive in the water. So all the digital photographs are actually lost in the disaster region, because using cloud service was not so common 10 years ago. We use that often these days, like Dropbox, we use that, but now it wasn't common 10 years ago. So because of materiality of photograph, these actually survive. That I find it really fascinating. So I started thinking of how important it is actually to keep some material objects such as photographs or family albums to help us really preserve memories.
Is there like an emotional response, Dr. Nakamura, that is evoked in you when you were going through this process? Did you feel like a relationship with any of the subjects in these photos, or I don't know?
Yeah, because I was in this quite a relatively small town and a location called Utatsu, which is also a fishing community in the town called Minami Sanriku. So people tended to know each other. It's a small community. So as I was there for a long time, also I got to know local residents who came to look for their own photograph. So there was a moment when they came and found their own photos. They, of course, cry for joy, but at the same time, there were always some people who could not find a single photograph. So it was always very emotional to be there. because, I had to deal with both kind of, people, of course, cry really, happy for some people who found them, but there were always people who just could know. And also some people looking for the photo of their lost family members. So it was always very emotionally engaged activity that was.
I can't even imagine, honestly, that when I look at these photos, just visually, like what I see is almost the equivalent of, I'm going to throw this out there. It's the photographic equivalent of tie-dye, right? It's like the patterns are random, and I guess that's how the chemicals have reacted with the salty water and the earth and all of those things to sort of degrade these pictures. But yet there's these images that you can sometimes see kind of wanting to pop through, wanting to be seen, and that feels really impactful to me, as you talk about its relationship to memory and why we take photos and how important they are to us, and in the relationship that you just made, to today's world, knowing that this is 10 years ago possibly, but today's world, how we just take them all on our phones and they don't maybe have the same significance that they did once, because we take them without consequence, right? Like, you just keep pressing the button and there's sort of no end to how many you can take or no expense to printing them. So we kind of, even as myself taking photos these days is very different than I used to take photos when I had to buy the film, load it in my camera, didn't know what the image looked like until after it was printed. Is a whole different kind of psychology around the art of photo taking and how that connects to our memories.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. Exactly. Was a very different kind of relationship with photograph. So in this particular context, they really meant something very different than digital photograph we take these days.
Thanks, Phoebe. I think that again, putting this installation together with the Lost Homes, I think has incredible power. For me as a visitor, the two together were incredibly powerful. The next installation, Rick, if you can bring up the next slide. This two artists working together, one Masao Okabe. I hope I'm not totally mispronouncing.
Close enough.
So all my apologies to him. He has been working on what's called frottage. So this is that's from the French word that means to rub. This is a technique of rubbing charcoal or crayon on paper on a surface that's rough to pick up the pattern of the texture. And he's been doing this on trees, and started with the project started with trees in Hiroshima that had been irradiated. And here, decades later, he is continuing this project with trees in the area near Fukushima, the evacuated area, the Okuma forest. And this installation is like it's like a giant drum. So the walls are about 10 feet high, and the outside of it, these circular walls, the outside is painted black, and it's covered with these frottage works. So the prints of the actual rubbings from these trees are attached to this wall. So it is like, it does evoke an enormous old growth tree, and the texture of it. And then on the inside of the installation, so there are two slits right up on the opposite each other, and these slits allow entry into the installation. And if we go to the next slide, Rick, the installation is this brilliant white. It's an unnaturally bright, all of the surfaces are shiny and bright white. The floor, the curving walls, the ceiling, and it is kind of evocative of, it evokes the, inside of a nuclear reactor, or not that I've ever been in one, but the inside of a metal drum. And this, because this sense of being bombarded by the light, the light is almost, it's palpable in this room from all of these reflective surfaces. It's just, it was almost intimidating from, to walk into it. It felt like there was a barrier to walking in this so brilliant, blazing white. That it's, it seemed forbidden to go in almost. And inside this circular container, there are, above the entryways, there are rubbings that the artist made of trees that had been cut down. So there were sacred trees that had to be cut down as part of the decontamination project. And so he's done rubbings of the cut surfaces, and that captures the rings of the trees, and they very much resemble fingerprints. And the two sacred trees that he did rubbings of hang above the entrances to this installation. And they're, unlike the black charcoal rubbings that he's done of the bark on the outside of the tree, outside of the installation, these rubbings are done in a blue crayon, have a different kind of feeling to them. But the rings themselves, the marks always remind me of human fingerprints, with the very unique concentric formations. On the floor, there's a grid of 4x4 tiles, and these black shiny tiles contain also images of these rubbings of cut trees that remind me of X-rays. So the other kind of impression that arises for me in this space is one of like a surgical kind of room. It's again, because it's so clean, but and so bright. On the wall of there's a video monitor, and this is the only other thing in the interior. And we're going to share with you now this is a video made by Chihiro Minato, called In the Okuma Forest. Rick, if you'd like to play this. This is the artist at work in the forest as he's making a frottage of a tree. So this gives you some of the sense of the size of the tree that he's working with, and the size of the paper that he's working with, and the effort that it's taking. To really capture the texture. So this is, so in the forest, the video is longer than this, and also includes the trek into this forest, which is in part of the I think the evacuated zone. So there's still radioactive particles. So the artist and his team are all dressed in white hazmat suits and protective gloves. He's wearing a mask, and in order to do this work. And when he's completed one of the rubbings, he always makes a note about the location, and he notes about the tree itself, and they record the level of radiation as well, and the date, and to accompany these rubbings. So again, as I mentioned, that how many trees had to be cut down. This is part of the decontamination effort afterwards at this location, and many of them were homestead woodland trees that were protecting homes from wind, and strong, tall trees, cedar, cypress, pine, oak, that had been there for how many decades themselves. And in addition, there were about 15 million cubic meters of polluted soil also had to be removed. And that the contaminated soil was then placed in black bags called flekon, which means flexible container bag. These enormous bags, I don't know what they were made, must have been made of to contain the radiation within them, and stored at a site. And I don't know what's going to happen to them, but there is a comment that Katagiri makes in the catalog about this process that I'd like to share with you. He says that the decontamination process involved removing the surface layer of radioactive soil to a depth of about 10 centimeters, or about 8 inches. And he goes on to say, I heard that it takes about 100 years to form 1 centimeter of surface topsoil. So that's the equivalent of 1,000 years. And soil just doesn't accumulate on its own. It's a gift from the dead who gave up their lives for the sake of lives that come after them. Having wasted this gift worth 1,000 years, how can we justly make up for it in the coming 1,000? So this devastation, also the disaster itself, the earthquake, the tsunami, there were fires, and also this radiation, and then the decontamination efforts also compounding the damage for survivors, the losing these trees and having their environments completely, the landscape around them completely altered through these efforts as well. So just compounding loss and destruction. The artist himself, also something to mention, he's 79, so the incredible energy that he has to be able to go into the forest and to continue this work, it's incredibly impressive, and his dedication to this project. He has also worked with, done installations as well, working with contaminated soil as part of a different project. And originally, I think he was meant to come along with a number of other artists and involved in these projects. If it weren't for COVID, they'd be coming to visit with us. And Mr. Okabe was going to come and hold workshops, I believe, and to connect with Indigenous residents and to exchange, again, tales and relationships with that people have with trees. There's this deep kind of bond with the land and with trees that many people share across cultures, and this is part of what he's interested in. The next series of installations are around the theme of connections, because one of, as we mentioned, what's also obvious is that when something like this happens, it's not just the local, it's not localized. Many other areas are affected. And there is a distinct relationship between Japan and Chile when it comes to earthquakes and tsunamis. And the Pacific Ocean connecting so many of us. And this project, called the Tsunami Ladies, is one of these connection projects. These women have all been connected by their similar experience, having survived tsunami in Chile and in Japan. So this short, we won't be able to share the video with you, so I'm just giving you an idea of the contents. It's about 20 minutes long, and it looks at the 3 Chilean women who traveled to Japan to meet 3 Japanese women and to share their stories and their experiences and their recipes. So this photograph taken from the film is of, can identify, I think, 3 Chilean women and 1 Japanese woman in the kitchen wearing their chef's hats and head coverings and their aprons, and they're working on something together. There's a table full of food to be prepared in front of them. And some of the recipes that they created, they're sort of hybrid recipes. And one of them was, I think they made octopus empanadas. So they all went out on the boat and did some fishing, and also went to the markets and picked up what was fresh that day, and then and used the Japanese ingredients in some more traditional Chilean recipes. And they again, they are just recounting that they understood this connection. One of the Japanese women recounting how she was told that after an earthquake, there would be a tsunami, and that if there was an earthquake in Chile, there would also be a tsunami in Japan. And that's, and likewise, the Chilean women also knew that when Japan shook, there would be a tsunami in Chile. So these women, in fact, in 2010, there was a Chilean earthquake tsunami, and that caused, and the corresponding tsunami in Japan caused quite a bit of damage there as well. And then the 3/11 Great Eastern Japan earthquake caused, I think it was about a 6-meter tsunami in Chile. So, and the connections here in the Pacific Rim, of course, here in BC, there was many of the lost and swept belongings and debris from the tsunami have been carried by the Pacific to many coasts, including the Pacific Northwest. And I think there were some 4 fishing boats that were recovered, 3 in the Haida Gwaii region, and 1 was found near Klemtu, which I think is it's about 130 miles north of, I think, is it Port Alberni. And Ernest Mason, who is the son of a hereditary chief, found one of these fishing boats, and they repaired it and used it for tours. They were working at the Spirit Bear Lodge in Klemtu, and they then went to great efforts to trace the owner of this fishing boat. And the owner of the fishing boat lives in Ofunatu City, which is the city that is featured in the Lost Homes installation at in this exhibition. So the owner and his wife traveled from Japan to Klemtu to be reunited.
Do you want to show the next
we can show the photo of
Yeah.
that, Rick? And here, this photo shows them together, reunited on the boat, and holding up the flag of the boat. And this was taken at Klemtu. And Fuyubi, did you want to tell us what the flag says? It's it has Japanese writing on it in red and the green and blue background. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's a name of the boat called, the translation would be pine tree, twin pine trees. That's the name of his boat. Yeah, the fishermen usually have this kind of the flag for their boat. That's why he brought one when he came here to be reunited with boat.
He brought it with him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't found with the boat. No, it was brought afterwards. And you have some other connections with the owner. Did you?
Okay,
you met him?
So, as you also mentioned, the 4 fishing boats were recovered in BC,
Mm-hmm.
and actually I helped identify owner of one of the boat, which was ashore on Haida Gwaii. And then I actually have met 3 fishermen among those 4 owner of 4 boats. And he was Mr. Sasagi, who's in this photograph, was one of the fishermen I actually met back in Tohoku. So I went to visit him. When was it? Anyway, I met him a few times in his hometown. And he's from this town called Ofunato in Iwate Prefecture. And the scale model we have on display is actually his hometown. So there is that kind of connection there as well, because Lost Homes project made so many models, but I selected this particular one to make that connection because he's from there.
When these boats were discovered in BC, were they eventually taken back to Japan, or like were they so damaged that they couldn't be taken back? Or
no fishing boat was taken back to Japan because by that time, most of fishermen, like he had already purchased new fishing boat. And it's actually very rather complicated process. Once he registered a new fishing boat, it's not so easy to actually get the boat back. But anyway, the boat was quite damaged to that point. It wasn't really possible to use for fishing. And then, as Steph said, the community there repaired this boat and used for touring for a while. But they are not using that anymore because damage was quite large. So they could not continue using this for such a long time. I also contacted those who recovered the boat on Haida-Gwaii. Two were actually recovered by Haida-Gwaii's Highland Marine Service. So they recovered them, they kept them, but they didn't know what to do. The only thing they did was really trying to find the owners to share where they were actually recovered and what they did. So that's why I took the photograph of those the boats on Haida-Gwaii and to the owners back in Tohoku region, because these are actually rather, well, Mr. Sasaki is relatively young. He's in his early 50s, but the other fishermen are quite old, so they have already retired. They don't use internet. They don't use like a computer. So I had to physically deliver the printed photos to them, but they're really happy to their boat somehow washed up here in Canada, which were really kind of taken care of by somebody else.
And I'm sorry to ask this again, but I think I must have missed the date that this photo was in, because like how many years after the earthquake is this boat arriving in Canada? Okay,
so this photo when he was visited here was taken in 2015. So I think the boat was recovered a year earlier in 2014, I think. So it took like 3 years for the boat to travel across the Pacific.
Okay.
I love how how you are able to make these connections with these projects and the people that you've worked with and encountered. Again,
sure.
This is
one thing maybe I should probably mention here now, because the disaster itself is such a tragic event. We know that, but I didn't want to focus on the aspect of disaster. Rather, I wanted to focus on like new connections and new relationships that have been created because of the disaster. And also I wanted to focus on the regeneration nature. That's why I decided to work with flower artists and other artists who work with trees. So that was kind of very important part of my exhibition as well.
Those creative energies coming forward. And the idea also running through the many of the projects here concern the message, of this experience and how this experience can inform other people. And there's been disaster education and that aspect of also of work like this, and the role of museums in preserving and maintaining our memories, helping us to store them and to contextualize them. And as we are members here of we are on land that is in the Pacific Rim, and of course susceptible also to earthquakes. We've been lucky to be in my lifetime spared, but again, the forecasting is such that these things happen, and the preparedness that we're undergoing here in Vancouver. There's a lot of there's been a lot of seismic upgrading and earthquake preparedness happening here, and of course at the Museum of Anthropology. The next photograph shows some of the work, some of what's involved in doing this at the museum in particular. So for those of you who haven't been out to the Museum of Anthropology, at UBC. The collection is extraordinary and includes a lot of First Nations carvings and totem poles that are I don't know how tall, but have required a special the gallery that displays them is mostly glass fronted with enormously high ceilings so that they can stand and be lit naturally. And this photograph is very careful removal of one of the totem poles that's been carefully wrapped to protect it. It's in a protective sling. It's being tilted back. So these have had to be very carefully removed and put into another part of the museum, another gallery actually, but because the ceilings of that gallery aren't high enough, they have to rest horizontally there. And that's where they will be until the seismic upgrade is completed. Is that right? You can tell us a little bit about what's involved here and how long it's been going on and how long it's going to take.
Yeah, it's been delayed. It was construction was originally going to start the end of 2019, but it has not even started yet. But we are hoping it's going to finally start later this year. But once it starts, the construction itself will probably take up to 18 months or 2 years. And once construction is done, we have to reinstall everything back to the gallery space. That's going to be a major undertaking as well. Of course, we have many totem poles in this gallery by different BC First Nations. So we've been working with them all the way through, consulting them, learning how to, really show them how to preserve them. So we've been working with them quite carefully all the way through, from the removal to the reinstallation. But yeah, I think it's going to take quite a long time. But anyway, hoping it's going to start sometime soon.
I hope so too. Rick, if you this concludes my virtual tour. Rick, if you'd like to just put up the credit slide with all of the names of thanks that I don't want to insult anyone by trying to pronounce them, so I won't, but they are here and we thank them very much. And I thank you, Fuyubi, for being my guide, my personal guide. I was so lucky to have you as my personal guide through this exhibition. It's hard to do justice to it. It's haunted me ever since I first encountered this through your virtual tour. So you have created how many videos now? 6, 8?
I don't even remember. Yeah, I think we have created about 6 so far, different kind of online video program. And then I'm working on the last one right now. So we'll be publishing one more. But because my collaborators are all Japanese who don't necessarily speak English, so those videos are unfortunately just offered in Japanese with English subtitle because that's the only way we could do. So I've been working on English subtitling with some of the students I work with for this project. But at least many people across the world have been accessing those videos, especially the online tour of my video, which is great. So this is another online video we now have for different kind of audience, which is great as well. Because I didn't give my tour in English either. I gave my tour in Japanese with English subtitles. So
yes, well, I have an idea about if we could maybe talk about creating audio subtitles perhaps to make those videos accessible for our members and our audience who are blind and partially sighted. We can talk about that
Great idea.
afterwards.
Great idea. As we transition into the Q&A portion, I just want to acknowledge that we do have a hand from Andrew, and friends, please, if you have questions, I'm sure there's lots of them about the different experiences of Dr. Nakamura being there in person year after year and Steph being in the gallery. But let's go to Andrew and ask Andrew to unmute and ask a question or share comment.
Yeah, it was really good, really impactful. Yeah, I'm a little out of sync here because I'm going back to the beginning. There were so many photographs at the beginning. I was wondering what size they are on the wall. Are they like photo book sized, or are they blown up so you can see a lot of the detail?
That's on the photo wall. That's like the wave, right?
No, no, no. The original, the first part with the flower arrangement shots and
Ah.
the picture of the valley that was all swept away by the tsunami and whatnot. I was just wondering what scale that experience is.
Yeah, I can probably find the actual measurements in the catalog, but it's as I recall, the very first illustration was a larger, maybe about 2 feet by 2 feet wide, perhaps. The photos from the Rias Arc Museum were they larger than 8 by? They were larger than 8 by 10. What would do you know the measurements off the top of your head, Phoebe? If you're not, I'm going to look them up.
No, not in the catalog, because we actually made a print for exhibition, so there are no original prints from the museum. But I think you're right; they are relatively small size. The photos, even the actual illustration is actually very small, but we made a larger print for our exhibition.
Yeah, because they looked there was a lot of detail in them, and
yes.
I thought they could have been blown up quite large.
Yes, and then the flower artist photograph, also we made prints here. We just followed the digital file, so we made the prints here. So there are three different sizes actually, because some photos are shown on they are projected. So for 3 photos we have, one of the photos that you talked about, the first photograph you talked about with the flower in the boots, that's rather large because it's projected image at the entrance of the exhibition. Right. Yeah, and other photos are prints, and they are smaller, but they are quite large, aren't they? There are 2 different sizes, but they are rather large photos.
Thanks.
And the other detail about again, you could tell me how many of Ketagiri's photos are in this exhibit, but one of the things that also struck me is because that's the first installation you encounter when you go into the exhibition. So and then I presented them to you in the order that they appear. The Rias Arc photographs are at the very end, sort of behind the memory wall. And there's sort of a tunnel of those photographs that are about 8 by 10, and they've all been mounted. And the thing about those photographs that make them so powerful is the commentary that went with them. So the people who took the photographs had comments with them. But going back to the Katagiri images, when you first come in and you encounter the projected image of the boot first, and then there are panels, the wall panels that have been set at different angles. And I remember you telling me that was an intentional design choice for the exhibition, so that these works could then be presented on these movable walls on either, sometimes both sides. But it was that sense of dislodgement, that these walls had been moved they've been shaken out of place, that they were again, it wasn't a direct path, to give you that sense of having to go through a space that had been shaken up or altered. The walls moved out of normal positions.
So we are showcasing 22 photographs by Atsunobu Katagiri, the flower artist, at the exhibition.
Mm-hmm. And he does have a book. We will send out a link to he does have, I don't know if it's available in Canada, but I know he's
we have actually his book available in a museum shop. I don't know whether we have still copies left, but we ordered some, but I don't know whether we still have any copies left. But it's a bilingual publication. And the exhibition publication is also bilingually done in Japanese and English. But his book called Sacrifice is also bilingual publication.
Mhm.
Yeah, because he said he doesn't have many copies left, but he agreed to sell some copies, so we ordered some. But the last time I was at the museum, the shop said, yeah, it's people really like it.
Running
Yeah.
out.
There was
Popular item.
There was one other thing that you ran out of at the that we didn't have time. There's so much in this exhibition, but there was another project, one of the Women's Eye projects. They were responsible for the tsunami ladies video. It was they were kimono. It was the same town as the Rias Arc Museum, and the women were making things, recycling, purposing kimono fabric. Or do you want to tell us a bit about that?
So the two women, they're relatives, and then the kimono that their mothers used to wear were kept in the storage, which survived the tsunami. So they decided to use those kimono to make kind of fabric accessories and small purse and things like that. After they used up what they had, people across Japan learned about their project, and people started donating their old kimono so they can still make those fabric to sell. So it's about women's kind of empowerment, resilience. They didn't want to be useless victims. They wanted to do something about it. If I can also briefly mention, this wasn't part of the tour. There's actually another section with different work. There are lots of videos from archive called the Center for Remembering 3/11. This is also the archive of the videos and photographs submitted by mostly by the local residents, survivors themselves. Some works are about artists and filmmakers, but mostly by the local residents. So it's a way to share their diverse experiences. Because we often talk about the disaster as if everyone went through the same thing, but no. Each person really had a different kind of engagement experience with the disaster. So I wanted to really show the diversity of different voices through this video project.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got a couple hands here, so we're going to do Toby and then Megan. So go ahead, Toby. You can unmute. Just give a moment for that.
Yes.
Hang on, Megan. It's Toby first, and then we'll call on you. Okay.
Okay.
No worries. But I think Toby's unmuted.
I'm sorry. It was my hand was up a mistake.
Oh, all right, Toby. No worries. Megan, you're up, my friend.
Okay. Yes. What island was the tsunami on? What island was it on in Japan? What part of Japan was it? Like what northern, southern? Was it on the island where Tokyo and Nagoya was? Or like what island in Japan was it that had the tsunami?
Actually, it wasn't an island. It was a really large area of northeast Japan across the coast. And there are some islands along this coast too, but it's really the huge area on the northeast coast was affected by the tsunami. But really large Great East Japan was affected by the earthquake, including Tokyo.
Including, so it hit Tokyo too?
Tokyo was affected by the earthquake, but not by tsunami, because really large area was shaken by the earthquake, but only the coastal town suffered the tsunami waves.
Because I love Japan. I don't want to see any of my friends hurt there. Yeah.
But we do get earthquake across Japan, so but this time was mostly northeastern Japan.
Okay. Okay, good. Oh.
Thanks, Megan, for your thoughtful question.
You're welcome.
We've got Josette, I believe, has a hand.
Yes, yes. Hi. As usual, Steph, you did a marvelous job of describing everything. I'd like to know, in regard to the photographs, I tend to watch a lot of true crime stuff, and what they do is science, the forensic science. I was just wondering, in regard to the photographs, if they'd tried this method of finding out what is under the actual print, because they've been known to figure these things out with other things. And I was just that wasn't mentioned. And I was just wondering if forensic science was used to try and discover what was on some of these photographs.
Yeah, actually, this particular group, Omoide Memory Salvage Project Group, it was actually started by the academics, group of the academics who do kind of information technology. So in order to actually look for the owners, this group used a lot of kind of latest technology, such as what we call face recognition. They digitized all the photographs they rescued and cleaned. So they created the database so that it was easier for people to look for their photograph. But at the same time, this community have lots of elderly people who are not necessarily familiar with using computer. So they actually have the physical photos and photo albums so that it was actually easier for them to look at the actual photograph and photo albums. And as I said, this is a small community. People tended to recognize each other. So through using that kind of personal network, they managed to actually locate the owners of those photos.
Oh, I see. Okay. I just couldn't imagine going through something like that. I did watch the coverage originally, and it was just, horrible. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Josette, for your question.
Thank you for your question. Yes.
We've got a hand from Lori and then a hand from Nancy. So let's go Lori first.
My question is about the totem poles. I really like stuff like that. How many do you have in the museum and how did you get them in there? Because I know they're very big.
Actually, I actually don't know how many we have. We have many of different sizes. But the totem pole we just removed from the location we call Great Hall. The museum was designed by the well-known Canadian architect called Arthur Erickson. As far as I know, he actually created the space so that we could actually display the totem poles. That's why the ceiling is really, really high. And we have a totem pole from different BC First Nation, not just with one. We have many from different First Nations. And the reason we got them was because in the BC, British Columbia, not just our museum, there was a project called Salvage Project to preserve existing totem poles. Because many years during the prohibition of potlatch, First Nation were not allowed to hold potlatch ceremonies and events. So they lost opportunity to actually create totem poles either during that time. So when the ban was lifted, and then many community members realized there were not many totem poles left. So they felt it was very important to preserve existing old totem poles. Therefore, the salvage project happened, led by the BC government and our museum and the Royal British Columbia Museum and many First Nation community worked together to preserve them. That's why we have totem pole by BC First Nations. So the reason we have them was because most of the community did not have a museums or facility to actually keep them. So we kind of looking after those belonging on their behalf in a way. We are working always together so that at least they can be securely looked after at the museum. But as I say, we have many more in the storage too. So we have part of the collection on display, but any museum have many more objects kept in the storage because we just don't have enough space to show everything. But thank you for your question. Yeah.
Do you have to put something over them to protect them until you can, put them in the museum?
No, we don't put anything. We don't cover those totem poles. The one we have just moved from the gallery space, another gallery space during construction, they are actually on the view. If you come, you can actually see them on display, but we don't cover with anything. Because usually totem pole used to stand outside, not within the building. So they tend to actually last quite long.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori, for your question. Nancy, we've got a hand from Nancy, and then we'll go to Karen. I'll give Nancy a moment to unmute. There's a lot of really beautiful First Nation carvings pieces in the Museum of
Can you
Anthropology.
hear me?
Yes, Nancy, we've got you.
Oh my God, I don't even know how to do this. You think I know by now? Okay. Thank you for showing this, because on the weekend I saw a document about the tsunami that hit Japan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And I was in Bali, and I met a fella that was traveled around the world, and he was a writer in Toronto, and he thought he had to go to Japan for a wedding, but he had so many problems going to each country, and he was so excited to be at his friend's wedding. And I ended up going to Malaysia after Bali, and we went on the plane together, and my flight was 5 hours, his was probably 5.5 hours. When I just got off the plane, I sat down and met my family, and the tsunami hit. I go, oh my God, I bet he's in that tsunami, and brought me back memories, because in March 2011, it hit so bad, and I've never ever contacted this gentleman. But there is a question that I was going to ask you. You know that flower you were talking about that smelled? Was that flower named? Do we have that one in the Queen Elizabeth Park? Because there was a lineup of people going to see that flower that only bloomed once every 100 years, and it smelled. Is that the same flower?
No.
No, it's
What flower is that? Do you know?
that's
It's called Mizawi in Japanese. It's a native to the coastal area in Tohoku region. So I think it's mostly grown in Asian countries. That Canada might have imported the same flower that I don't know, but yeah, it might be a different flower in the park here.
Because my daughter said that they went to Japan and they were talking about it too, and I don't know what, the smell of it. It's a unique smell, she says. No, but you guys did a wonderful job. Thank you. It brought back lots of memories.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. Steph, do you remember the name of that flower? I want to call it a Frankenstein flower, but I don't think that's what
It's a corpse. It's called the corpse
the
flower.
corpse flower. There you go.
Colloquially, I don't know the actual generic name, but but that's the one that's at the Bloedel right now at Queen Elizabeth Park, and they anticipate it's going to bloom soon, and it gives off, when it does bloom, it blooms like just for 24 hours or something. It's very short-lived, but the stench it gives off is apparently horrible, redolent of, hence the name, the corpse flower, is that a reference to what it smells like. So I think they're selling tickets for they don't know when it's going to bloom, but you could take your chance and go and visit.
Because it's also quite large too, right?
It's I think probably as tall as I am, if or
Tall as
bigger.
a person. Yeah.
I think Mizawi is a relatively small flower, I think. Yeah.
But the Mizawi is completely different. And I have no idea about fragrance or anything like that. I think based on what it looks like, I would think it would smell sweet, but that's because it's a very delicate little purple blue flower. But it may not have any scent. Many wildflowers don't.
We've got a hand from Karen.
Yes, the corpse flower apparently will be growing 6 to 7 feet, they believe, and every 2 to 3 years, and 24 to 36 hours, I believe, it blooms. So, yeah, quite an anomaly, isn't it? Yeah, I just want to thank you, ladies, so much for bringing forth this program today, and thank you, Amy. It was so much beauty was brought forth in such a time of sadness and fear, and such a difficult time for so many that went through this tragedy. And all of us that were watching this from afar, just, we just felt such grief seeing the tragedy that came from this. And like Nancy, it brought me back to a dear friend of mine, her auntie had died in the 2004 Indian tsunami over in Thailand. And they're from, her and her mother are from Holland, and her children traveled from Holland down to Thailand to see if they could recover their mother's remains, and sadly were unable to. And I often think of that really difficult time being there supporting my dear friend who was a neighbor, and just the tragedy everybody had gone through and the loss. And I think of her, she was such a beautiful soul. And I'm just so grateful for the beauty that you've captured, or, were able to share with us, that was captured in this tragedy as well. And being to honor all the people of this beautiful fishing village, because that's where I lived in South Delta, in a fishing village. So, it was just so lovely to see just, that, and I have partial vision, so I was able to see everything that was going on, but just even the rings of the trees and the pictures and the devastation, but how, Steph, you described the beauty that came from this devastation by sharing the flowers, by, honoring, the seats in this movie theater. It was just, there aren't words to describe just how grateful I am for you sharing that with all of us. And my question of you is, where or how will these memories be kept for decades to come, to be shared with our children and our children's children? Thank you for this evening.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing that. It's a great question, because the exhibit at the Museum of Anthropology goes until when?
September 19th. So we have one bit over 1 month to go. But talking about how to preserve memories, the Rias Arc Museum of Art, whose photograph we are showing at this exhibition, now it's a permanent exhibition they have. In addition to that, many towns in the disaster region have, since the disaster, created memorial museums. There have been many museums and smaller memorials across the coast in the Tohoku. So there are lots of effort have been made to really preserve memories and stories, so the future generation will learn, so we can be also prepared. It's not just about, preserving memory. We really have to learn how we can be prepared as well. That's why, therefore, the title for this exhibition is The Future for Memory. So it's not really about the past. It's really to think about the future, how we can actually utilize what's been collected for future generations. So thank you so much for the question.
I'm just going to throw this out there, and then we'll get a question from Tilo and Yuko, but I just want to throw out there, what happens next? It's been 10 years. What is the state of rebuild now, or the state of community now, as you've traveled back year after year?
So the situation of recovery or reconstruction is actually quite diverse. It depends on each city or each village across the coast. For example, in the northern part of Iwate and Miyagi prefectures, the massive seawalls have been already built. So it's a tricky thing, because as I keep saying, many communities are fishing communities. So there were actually some protests against building massive seawalls. But having said that, the government decided to build really massive seawalls along the coast. That's not complete, but it's mostly, I think, now complete in many areas in Miyagi and Iwate prefecture. But situation in Fukushima is a bit different because of nuclear disaster. And that's why many community members from the town close to the nuclear plant have not been able to return to their home. Some might not be able to return forever. We don't know that yet. But so that's the ongoing situation many people in Fukushima are facing compared to Miyagi or Iwate Prefecture, northern of Fukushima. But it's going to take much longer time to really recover. Thinking about the major earthquake we also had in Kobe in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about psychological, scars, I don't think people are completely, recovered over, 25 years now.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Tilo's got a hand. I know he's waiting patiently. Gotta unmute yourself, my friend.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Well,
can hear you.
Okay. I remember that I had just actually came back from Japan. Sorry to your guests. My wife's Japanese. She comes from Sapporo, but we had gone to Japan that year, and I think I was home either a week or 2 weeks before this tsunami had hit. So it's quite clear in my mind, and I found years ago later on, they found a container that was in Japan, and when they opened up this container, there was a motorcycle in there. And the person who found it, they cleaned it up and they traced the serial number. And then they eventually found the original owner, and they had brought it back to him, back to Japan. But it floated all the way from Japan to here in BC. I was quite amazed, and I've heard about those boats also coming on our coast also. So it was really quite huge for everyone.
Thanks for sharing that, Tilo.
So that's all I have to say for that.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to have been in some place and then, you come home and you hear what happens and you're like,
We had taken the train and we went through that area where the tsunami had actually taken 4 of the trains before. So I was really shocked that we had got there and come back in one piece and before anything like that had happened.
yeah, it's quite amazing. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Tilo. Just as we wind down from our Q&A, friends, I just have sort of one last question to maybe wrap things up, and I'd love to have you both answer it from your different perspectives. And I just wonder if there is, it's not a fair question, I realize, but is there a moment in this, Dr. Nakamura, for example, in the creation of this project or an experience that just resonates with you so strongly about, this work? It's hard to choose just one, I'm sure, but I wonder if you can leave us with a memory. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's quite tough, isn't it? It's been like 10 years since I got involved. So there's many moments that I can think about. I was actually talking to Steph yesterday, and as a volunteer, one of the important things I think I could do was actually listening to survivors, because the level of the damage each survivor suffered was very different. For example, one family member might have lost their family members completely, whereas another person might have lost their home. So they couldn't really share the sentiment. But one particular story I remember vividly when I was in the town that year was that there's a woman who actually came to talk to me because she had a really lovely pet cat. If you have a pet, pets are your family members, whether cats or dogs, right? But she just could not share the sentiment with anybody who lost their human family members. So she found me and she cried, saying she actually lost a very important family member, which happened to be a cat. And I am a cat lover myself, lived with many cats, so I really sympathize with her. And I really remember that moment very clearly.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't think there's words to unpack that, to be in a space where you feel like your grief isn't big enough, so you're not going to share it. That's got to be a hard place to find yourself. Steph, how about for you as a witness to this exhibition at the Museum of Anthropology? Is there something that particular, again, there are lots of moments, I'm sure, but something particular you want to share with us, a memory you want to leave with us?
Oh, it is hard to come up with just one. As I said, just watching Fuyubi's virtual tour, it's just been haunting me ever since I first encountered it. And then to experience the tour in person. And then I've been actually tuning into those videos and reading the subtitles. And I think of all of those experiences, and most recently as well, listening to Fuyubi talk to the curator of the Rios Art Museum. He recounted his experience being in the museum on that day, and it was so powerful. And also what drove him to create this permanent exhibit, the rage that he felt, that people ignored the warnings of the 99% chance of there being a disaster in 30 years. The exhibition that he created about the whole history of tsunami in the region, and people, the locals, whatever. And then the series of events around it, where the year prior, when there was the Chilean earthquake and then the subsequent tsunami, they predicted higher tsunami in Japan. I think it was a 6-meter tsunami, which is like 20 feet, and a cause for evacuation. And it turned out that the tsunami was only 3 feet, and that people complained to the government that, how dare you, this cost us money. And so then the following year, I don't know if they erred on this, instead of overestimating this, whether that was what happened, maybe they underestimated it, but the warning that went out in the town that museum is located in was that it would just be a 6-meter but it would be a 6-meter tsunami. So they just experienced before a warning that was inaccurate. But he himself, feeling the effects of this earthquake prior to the tsunami, where he was saying that the average span of an earthquake is 1 to 2 minutes. This went on for 6 minutes. Which is why he thought that it had to be something else that was going on. And so it made it so, I was just so moved and affected by his account of the whole experience, and his responsibility that he felt to record it, and to make sure that this information isn't lost, to create this permanent exhibit. And one of the photos, because he was taking these photos himself, his home, he said if he hadn't been at the museum, he would not have survived, most likely. That his 4-story steel frame apartment building was completely wiped out. It just vanished. It just disappeared. And so he was taking these photos, and the night, I believe, of the tsunami, something that nobody else thinks about, and which also sticks with me, is the fires. There's a photo that is in the selection that Fuyubi has chosen for her exhibition, of fires. It's at night, it's kind of dark, and the fires seem to be glowing in the distance. The horizon seems to be on fire, and we don't think about, but this is one more level of destruction that happened, because apparently the oil tankers and the kerosene storage barrel, all of they're bursting and spilling, covering the ocean surface, and then all of the wooden debris and everything else that's also floating, absorbing that fuel and just acting like a wick. And the fires burned for hours, and so that all carried that destruction on top. So it was like a sea of fire that also went through the town, which I can't imagine the level, these so many levels of destruction, and how important it is to witness these, to be the witness, and to preserve these the facts of what happened.
Yeah.
you know, so that they don't get distorted, you know, so.
That's a
Mm.
powerful note to resonate on as we close down our tour this evening. And it's been a real pleasure to have Dr. Nakamura in our space to share with us this exhibition that's been curated. And before we let you go, though, I wonder if you're willing to participate in a prize draw with us.
Yeah, sure. Also, I would like to thank you, Amy and Steph, for giving me this opportunity to share the exhibition, and especially Steph for really creating a wonderful tour. I'm very impressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to bring Sarah up, our trusted VocalEye friend in the background, and Dr. Nakamura, I wonder, you know, usually we have folks yell out "stop" as the I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, you know, the word to pull the draw, stop. But if you have another word, a theme word that might resonate with you, I invite the creativity of that in this space.
Let me think.
Yeah. And
maybe I can say stop in Japanese then.
Oh, yes, very much, please. I would love to hear some Japanese. Sarah, where are you, my friend? You're probably here somewhere. I just don't see your square, but you can.
Oh, I'm right
in audibly.
Yeah, I'm right here. So Dr. Nakamura, anytime you're ready.
Okay. そこで止まって。
Perfect. And our winner is Lori Van Allen.
Lori, congratulations, Lori. We got Lori on the line still.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Wonderful, Lori. Well, you're the winner of our prize draw this evening. So we'll connect with you offline to get you your raffle prize. Awesome. Thank you, friends. So lovely to have you all in the space. And remember, we're coming back on September the 22nd. So I hope you all enjoy your summer. And for those of you who want to stick around and just have a little informal chat before we say goodbye, we're going to end our official recording now and just have a little social chat while we're still here in a space together.